Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. I want you to completely forget everything you think you know about how global power actually works, right? Because we're so used to thinking about international dominance in terms of, borders drawn on maps or huge militaries. But today, we're exploring a totally different architecture of influence. The source material we're looking at maps out this massive, super quiet strategy that's literally reshaping the globe as we speak.
I mean, think about it. While the world's attention gets completely swallowed up by wars, elections, and just the frantic cycle of daily headlines, we really need to step back and ask a massive question. What if the real weapons of tomorrow are entirely different? What if they don't explode at all, but just sit quietly on the water? We're so conditioned to track traditional defense spending, but the investments actually shaping our future, they look way more like everyday commerce than military hardware.
And that brings us to this idea. What if global power no longer depends on armies, but on infrastructure? This question really gets to the heart of a brilliant, quiet strategy happening right under our collective noses. While other nations might be laser-focused on deploying troops, China has been methodically, and I mean methodically, placing itself directly on the very arteries of global trade. From Asia to Africa, Europe over to Latin America, this whole thing is fundamentally about positioning, not conquering.
So let's get into Section 1. A new kind of empire, building leverage instead of territory. The paradigm shift here is absolutely fascinating. The old world approach, that was all about conquering territory, using armies. It was loud, it was aggressive, and it was highly visible. But the new world approach, it's all about buying influence through infrastructure. Actually, scratch that. It's about building influence. Armies are kind of becoming a thing of the past when it comes to everyday global leverage. Today, things like concrete, shipping ports, satellites, and trade routes, those are the modern tools of power.
When you look at the staggering, honestly mind-blowing scale of these investments over the last 2 decades, it's pretty wild. We're talking Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Greece, Djibouti, Brazil, huge swaths of Africa and Southeast Asia. Now, to a lot of these host nations, this looked like pure economic opportunity, right? Like new jobs, new development, a real win-win. But as this sprawling network grew, critics started looking at the big picture and asking a vital question. Is China just building trade routes, or are they quietly building global leverage?
Which brings us to Section 2, the Belt and Road, the really ambitious project officially launched back in 2013.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that this wasn't just a bunch of random, isolated financial investments. Not at all. The Belt and Road Initiative was a highly coordinated, frankly monumental effort to physically wire the global economy directly back to Beijing. By funding ports, highways, railways, pipelines, and these massive industrial corridors, China basically set out to create what a lot of analysts now call the New Silk Road.
And there are really 2 distinct ways to look at this whole initiative. On one hand, you've got the official stance, which is all about mutual cooperation and economic growth for everybody involved. But from a strictly geopolitical standpoint, the strategic reality yields something far more valuable to Beijing. We're talking unparalleled global access, massive diplomatic influence, and the literal physical framework for long-term economic control.
Let's zoom in a bit for Section 3, the Sri Lanka case study. This is the port that changed everything. To truly understand the risks involved here, we have to look at what happened with the Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka. So the host country took on these massive loans to build out this infrastructure, but when they eventually couldn't pay the debt, they had to hand over control of the port entirely to a Chinese company. This was a massive wake-up call for the international community. It proved that China wasn't just funding these ports, they were perfectly positioned to take control of them.
99. That number is the length, in years, of the lease signed for the Hambantota Port. Just pause and think about that for a second. A 99-year lease is essentially forever when you're talking about modern geopolitics. This wasn't some quick, temporary trade deal. It was a multi-generational transfer of absolutely critical maritime real estate.
And, this wasn't just some isolated incident either. Similar concerns are growing across global networks right now. From Greece all the way down through the African continent, stretching across the Indian Ocean and right up into the Mediterranean, Beijing's commercial footprint just keeps expanding. And every single new port added to the map strengthens their position inside the global trade network.
Moving on to Section 4, controlling the supply chain, infrastructure for resilience.
See, the strategy here goes so far beyond just moving basic consumer goods around. China recognizes a super fundamental truth of the modern era. In a global conflict, supply chains literally become weapons.
Economic resilience during any major international crisis, it relies entirely on who gets to dictate the physical flow of goods. Simply put, whoever controls the routes ultimately controls the global economy.
Because we aren't just talking about cheap electronics here. We are talking about the actual lifeblood of human civilization. We're talking oil to heat your home, food for your table, the semiconductors inside the phone you might be holding right now, and vital manufacturing components. The entire modern world runs on the movement of these specific items. So if you control the shipping choke points and the physical arteries that transport these everyday necessities, you effectively hold ultimate leverage over the entire modern world.
And to secure this kind of long-term leverage, the focus isn't on quick temporary election cycle victories. Not at all. It's placed squarely on massive, immovable assets. Think deep water ports that can handle the world's absolute largest cargo ships, massive logistics hubs, transcontinental railway corridors, and heavy maritime infrastructure. These things aren't built for the next 5 years. They're built for the next 50, maybe even 100 years.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Shaping the Future World. Why the West is worried.
So, why exactly are the United States and its allies getting so concerned about this? Well, they see this sprawling network translating into real geopolitical power in a few key ways. First off, there's the potential that these purely commercial ports could eventually pivot to support military logistics. Second, there's the creation of deep economic dependence, exactly like we saw play out in Sri Lanka. And third, the undeniable strengthening of Chinese trade dominance overall. To Western nations, these aren't just trade hubs. They view them as the foundation for a potentially unassailable geopolitical advantage.
And honestly, here is the core reality that's likely keeping Western strategists up at night. Once a deep-water port or a transcontinental railway is built, it becomes extremely difficult, if not literally impossible, to replace. I mean, you can't just swipe a pen and magically undo billions of tons of port concrete, right? This one simple fact completely shifts the dynamic from a standard economic competition into a deeply rooted fight over the physical foundation of the planet.
A new kind of empire is emerging, one built not with invasions, but with ports. That quote from our source text just perfectly hits the nail on the head and summarizes everything we've covered in this explainer today. Millions of containers move across our oceans every single year, bringing us our fuel, our tech, our food, and quietly, patiently, strategically, China is positioning itself at the absolute center of that entire system.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. The age of territorial empires, conquering land with armies, that might be fading into the history books. But the balance of power is absolutely shifting beneath our feet as we speak. The world is only just now waking up to how incredibly massive this infrastructural network has actually become. So, looking at the map of tomorrow, who do you think will truly shape the architecture of the future world?